Thanks for coming on the show today, Seung. Really excited to have you. I'd love to get started. If you just want to introduce yourself and share about, you know, where you've been, where you are, what you're most excited about right now.
Great. Jacob, thanks for having me. I want to thank Higher Aligned for having me on this platform. And my name is Sung. I have basically lived my life through the Air Force, 25 years in the Air Force. Went to the Air Force Academy for college. And then in that process and in that journey, most of the time in my Air Force life, I like to tell the civilian world that what I did is wherever I went, I was a CFO with body armor. So people are always like, comptroller, what's a comptroller? I say, it's kind of like a CFO with body armor. I deal with a lot of money. And so the younger I was and the more junior I was, it was less money. And then the older you get and the more senior you get, the amounts of money in the Department of Defense grow significantly. And so I did that for about 25 years. I like to tell everyone that my greatest accomplishment for 25 years is that no one went to jail. As far as I know, taxpayers were happy with how I managed the money. And traveled probably 14 different locations in that time. I'm married. I got 3 grown kids. We're empty nesters now. And then we retired out in San Francisco in 2017. And over the course of my career, having a background in economics, both in my studies and then also having the opportunity to teach economics when I was at the academy teaching, I formed this topic called Leadernomics. And so for the better part of the last 10 years of my military life, in addition to being a CFO, the military had me bouncing around all over the place, speaking on this topic of Leadernomics and how you blend economics into the foundations and framework of leadership. I always thought it was just for military and government circles until about, several years ago, a furniture company by the name of Herman Miller contacted me and they said, "Hey, we heard about you. We heard about your topic. Would you come on out and speak to our executive team?" And I said, why would a furniture company want me, an Air Force guy, to come out and talk to their executive team? And so I went and spoke to Herman Miller and they loved it. And then I thought, maybe there's something for this than just the military and the government. So retired, my wife started prodding me about when are you going to write a book? And so the last 4 years, I've devoted fully to writing a book called Leadernomics, and it's going to be coming out here shortly in September. So here I am.
That's so awesome. Okay, Leadernomics. So when you say leadership in economics, right, you're talking to somebody. I've taken one econ class in college. So big economist here. What is that overlap? It's not like supply and demand curves. Is it more, or is it more around what incentives are and the way that human behavior follows those?
Yeah, so economics is under heading of social science, right? And the thing about economics is that more often than not, a lot of the textbooks initially bring people into 101 and they kind of focus on the science side of things. So you get the supply and demand graphs, you get the data, you get the equations, and you get the math, and you never get their heart and their mind through the corridor to see the social side of that science. And so there's an entire behavioral aspect to economics, which I believe is the essence of economics because it was always created to be a human endeavor. And if you think about markets, right? If you think about a market economy, everything is a relationship. You don't have suppliers without consumers. You don't have producers, right? Without suppliers. You don't have employers without employees. And you don't have leaders without followers. So everything is a market relationship-based economy. And so my endeavor with Leadernomics from the get-go, when I was teaching it to now, has always been to put at the forefront the social, relational aspect of core economic principles in a market setting. And how does that get you to a place of optimal and maximum? And what's interesting is that the minute you start tapping into the social human side of things, you can't put a metric on it anymore. All of a sudden, it goes from numbers to priceless. It goes from market value to inherent value. And so that's where the aha comes in, is how do you get people, how do you incentivize, like you said, motivate, inspire? Well, you better get the social side right of economics. And so that's the essence of it.
Wow. I was like, oh yeah, I get this. And then that last part you're saying that dives pretty deep.
It does. It
into
does.
this idea, which I think is often overlooked in business, where, it's every single person you're talking to is, like infinite value. And there's, potential that is untapped in every person. And it really is those relationships that can bring that out. That's
Yeah,
so cool. I'm excited for your book to come out.
yeah, and like the reason why I like what you guys are doing is because you guys have this emphasis on culture. And, right at the end of the day, who defines culture? People. People drive culture, right? And when people don't respond to the desired culture, then they need to get re-incentivized and remotivated to align to the culture. And if leadership doesn't understand that, if leadership doesn't understand how their culture is or is not guiding them toward alignment, then there's going to be a whole bunch of issues. And so at the end of the day, right, like culture is truly built and run by people, and people can affect culture. But what I love is when culture is so strong, so good, that culture leads culture. And that's huge because the minute culture is leading culture, when social norms are driving what people do and their behavior, then you can kind of take your hands off the wheel.
Yeah, it's when I had a so I did Boy Scouts when I was a kid, and I had a scoutmaster that all the time when we were finishing our meetings or whatever, he would say, "Be the," and then we all had to say "leader." And I thought it was silly. You're like 13, you're like, "Oh, cool, I'm going to middle school, how am I going to be a leader?" But really recognizing, often in the world today, we misconstrue management with leadership.
Yeah.
And really, leadership is helping people see the bigger vision of what's
Yeah.
possible. And when that becomes embedded and ingrained in a team and everybody's lifting each other and you're all pointing to whatever North Star big mission you're aiming towards, um, it's magic.
It
And I
is.
feel sometimes people kind of smirk when I say that because it sounds silly, but like the objectives get done better. Business runs better, people make more money, but the more important thing is people, stop work in the evening and they're happy. They're super content with what they've done. They're happy while they're at work, they're happy outside of work, they're happier in their relationships because they feel like there's real alignment between those things. And it's a magical thing. It's a
It
magical
is.
thing.
It's magical, but and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I think it's so, I don't want to dismiss the fact that it's not easy. And because at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, a leader has to produce, right? So a leader is constantly drawn into metrics, into numbers, profits, revenue, quarterly results. And if they don't produce those numbers, that leader probably will not remain in that
Yeah.
position very long, right? So it's constantly pulling at them, and it's constantly, like you said, it's constantly pulling that leader back toward management, right? And so that's where it's so important that they understand that, man, there's a risk and there's a trust. Am I willing to take that risk because I actually do trust that if I lead instead of manage, that I will actually inspire, influence, motivate, and incentivize because of this culture and because of this alignment, that I will actually generate more than the bottom line that I'm constantly being pulled toward, right? And so it's risk, it's trust, and it takes courage to be a leader that doesn't get sucked back into management. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think of there's a couple of books in the last, 10, 15 years. You have Team of Teams, Dream Ownership that talk about this idea that, I mean, you're probably super familiar with this being spent all the time in the Air Force, right? We were talking before, my dad was in the Army for a while, where there's this objective. Like, this is the main mission. This is what needs to get done. If radio communication goes out, that doesn't change. But you can't call and say, "Hey, what am I supposed to do for this thing?" You know?
Yeah,
Instead, it's, "Hey, you understand, and you've been given the autonomy to move forward and
yeah,
execute on that." And I think, I mean, I think about when I kind of in my career went from being an individual contributor to having a team underneath me to then having teams underneath me. it really does become this, and even like with my kids, right? And my kids are little. My oldest is 8. When there's something to be done and it's within kind of my purview, maybe I could be overly confident, but I'm almost always like, oh, I can do that better and faster. Like whatever it is, I can feel the safest if I'm the one in charge of that. But that doesn't help anybody grow. And so by recognizing, hey, these individuals are worth a lot, like they're priceless. How can we help them understand that failing when you're trying? That's cool. As long as it's not you fail and 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 you never succeed, like something's broken, then you got to figure it out.
Yeah.
But helping them to have those opportunities
Yes.
is huge and really develops them into who they are. And I mean, that's when I look back at when I was a kid and a teenager, like I can think of so many examples of people who, obviously could have done it better than I could have.
Yeah.
But they were like, great, Jacob, this is on you. Like you go ahead and do this now. And
Yeah.
it's uncomfortable and you mess up, but then you get this trust and it builds this culture of, hey, we're all growing and, as long as we're directionally heading together, like we're in a good spot and we'll
Yeah.
get there.
So you in probably half the words just spit out chapter 3 of my book. It's this economic principle called comparative advantage. And it's really this notion that sharing is caring, right? And that the greatest results happen when everybody is able to give their contributory value, exchange that contributory value, have interdependence. And that's what team is, right? That's when you get the greatest results. And I'm a basketball junkie. I've got my Carolina shirt on. I'm a
Yeah.
basketball junkie, but and I'm a product of the 90s and I know your Utah fans will not like this, but I'm a Chicago Bull. Chicago Bulls, it took,
I grew up in Minneapolis, so, it's closer to the Bulls and the Timberwolves have never been good. There were a couple of years that there was hope, but that's it.
you- you're all Utah now. So, and it sounds silly, but it's not. And it's just loved the fact that when Michael Jordan was in his heyday, he was the most dominant player in every position on the court. So he was better than the center. He was better than the off guard. He was better than the point guard. He was better than the forwards. He could have done any one of those individual positions better than anyone else on the court. And then he got this coach named Phil Jackson. And Phil Jackson said, you know what, Michael? You got to stay in your lane. And the best lane for you is this thing called the 2 guard. And you've got to begin trusting your lesser teammates to rise to the occasion. And the only way they will is if early in the game, not late in the game, early in the game, you distribute, you share, you trust, you delegate, you give them an opportunity to make mistakes and to succeed. And as you do this throughout the course of a season, you'll be surprised where the team will be. And that's what altered the entire aspect of the Chicago Bulls. If you ever look at their roster from their dynasty of the 90s, they did not have an amazing roster. They had an amazing player who finally learned what it meant to know that sharing is caring and that interdependence and exchange is going to produce the greatest, most maximum optimal outcome. And so that's what you're talking about when you're talking about your 8-year-old and you're saying, hey, you know what? I can cut the lawn better, but you know what? I'm going to let him create a pretty bad haircut on that lawn over the course of the next several months, because in that sharing, you're caring and you're developing not only confidence, but you're developing his skills and you're developing the sense in your 8-year-old, like, hey, I'm doing something that dad does. And it's a whole new ball game when you start getting players on the team to start believing that kind of stuff. So yeah, you just said it. That's it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think recognizing too that, hey, you don't have to, like, it doesn't have to be perfect.
Yes.
Is huge. There's this, I mean, you see it in leadership all the time where, um, we get to, I think I saw it earlier because my parents were more open about this, but I feel like everybody gets to, like 25, 26, and they're like, wait, adults don't actually have it figured out.
Mm,
Like you think when you're a kid, you think everybody knows what they're doing.
mm,
You hit a magical age and all of a sudden you have all the answers.
yeah.
And that's the same thing at work. you get promoted as a manager, and in a lot of organizations, people just assume you know what you're doing.
Right. That's
And
exactly
that
right.
is so far from the truth
That's
most
so
of the
far from
time.
the truth. That's so far from the truth. Well, I mean, let me ask you, as an entrepreneur launching something relatively new, right? I mean, where would you be if you waited till perfection?
I mean, nowhere, right? Yeah, it's very much is like how can you get things out there? Because the only way you can learn is by actually putting things out into the world.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means, things break and if somebody has a crappy experience or somebody says, "Hey, this is the dumbest thing ever." Like it's never going to work. And then you have to say, "Cool, well, you get to decide what you're going to do with that." And you can bring it back in and, yeah, learn and change and grow. And yeah, it is entrepreneurship is yeah, the school just started a week ago again. So my kids are back in school, and I was talking with somebody who lives in my neighborhood about like lifelong learning, where he's an engineer. He just finished his last big kind of engineer licensing thing. He's a civil engineer, building highways. And he was like, I realized that I'm not learning anything anymore. Like,
Yeah.
and my kids were like, well, what are you learning? And I was like, well, what am I learning? I was like, oh no, I've started a company. Like I learn all the time. Not fun lessons always, but I'm always learning.
And that's why I feel like sometimes people put like this. I think people put this notion of like entrepreneurship, and they think of visionaries, innovators, creative people that are just, like got 50 things on their plate. But like, to me, like, the best entrepreneurs, they're leaders, right? Because there's so much risk taking, there's so much courage involved, there's a humility to fail, right? And not to be ashamed, and to actually be transparent and vulnerable about it. These to me are like leadership traits, right? The creativity, the visionary stuff, all of that stuff. I mean, that's great, but it's the leadership traits to me that take an entrepreneur next level. And so, like, when you say things like continuous learning and courage and starting, even though you know that you're not at a place of perfection, that to me is like leadership stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think also one thing I've experienced throughout my career, this kind of manager versus leader is I've observed, managers who are great at running meetings and, but when it comes to, hey, actually do the work, they're not there for that. They're there to, like ride on the coattails of the people doing the work. And so that's a big difference between, somebody who's managing and then leading where, you can have the most visionary person ever, if they want to do it. But then when it comes time to shovel dirt, if, they're not the one waking up early to shovel dirt or, doing whatever that nobody else wants to do, it's really hard to want to follow them.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Got to set the example.
Yeah. No, yeah. We could talk for hours. I'll have to have you on again soon because
That sounds
maybe
wonderful.
after your book comes out. So when does your book come out again?
It comes out
September 9th?
September 9th. It'll be out
Okay.
on Amazon, Barnes, and bookshop.org. And yeah, and you can find me out on LinkedIn as well. I love engaging with people that are interested in leadernomics, leadership, economics, and just engaging.
And who are the best people to buy the book? Just anybody who wants to be a better leader?
Any father with 4 kids.
All right,
No,
I
quite
have a few
honestly,
friends that fall into that, but
I do like to say that, economics is a universal discipline, meaning that it's applicable across all generations, all ethnicities, all genders, all cultures. And so it's really available for anyone that wants to see, how does this thing called economics as a social science, how is it as a framework give me a foundation for decision making and leadership and mentorship? And if you have any curiosity in that, then this book is for you.
yeah. Okay, well, awesome. Well, everybody listening, you heard him. Go pre-order it like I have, and it'll be great. Well, awesome. Thanks so much, Sung. This was
Thanks,
this was great
Jacob.
conversation.
Yeah, love
Yeah.
talking to you.